So let's see if we can figure out how to use the gradient mesh tool. Now, guys, I'll be honest with you. Gradients are not something I use a whole lot just because I do so much stuff using screen printing and vinyl. And so this kind of halftones where there's a transition of color is not something I use a whole lot, okay? But the gradient mesh tool is something that kind of matches up, as we were just talking about the gradient tool and the gradients panel. And so I wanted to put this in there also, all right? So if I come over here, I've got a couple of shapes here, and the way that I get to the gradient panel, there's a gradient tool over here. If I hover over it, it'll pop up maybe and say gradient tool. Anyway, that's what it's called. It's a gradient tool over here. But we're going to apply a gradient mesh to this by first selecting it, and then going to, that way it wasn't popping up. Go up here to Object, up here at the top, and then go to Create Gradient Mesh. And so now you'll see, and I've got my preview button clicked on, so if you turn that off, then you won't see what it looks like. You can change how many rows and columns it has. You can change if it goes from the center or to the edge. Okay, so where does your color start? You also can do flat, but we're gonna do this to center. Leave it at 5 and 10. You also can change it so the higher this number is, the more kind of washed out it is, or the more that is spread. So I had this set at 44. There's not a right or wrong here. Just kind of play around with it to get the effect that you want, okay? And so now you have the ability to go in. If I use my white arrow or my direct select tool, I could, in theory, go in and manipulate. If I single click on it and then click and drag, I can go in and manipulate some of these pieces and kind of change how that transition works and how it kind of, what areas are bigger and smaller. So that might work for you depending on what you're trying to do. You also have the ability to go to your mesh tool, and when you have this selected with the mesh tool can be used to add extra points if you want to, Control Z to undo that, or it also can be used to add color. So if I wanted just a little spot of color there that still kind of follows those rules, and then I can still kind of manipulate that and move that around if I do. I really don't like that color, but that doesn't matter because I'm just showing you a technique. All right, so, and I can have, if I wanted to add that into these pieces, it's going to fit into that section. All right, now that's not necessarily looking fantastic. We're kind of looking like a little makeshift science fair project that we've got going on here. Okay, but that is something you could use. A lot of people use this to get those different lighting elements. And so here's an object like an orange, and then how is the light hitting that, and how is the light dispersed across that? So might be something you can play around with. I also have here a square object. So same thing here. If I select this object, object, create gradient mesh, and then I still have that option here. Okay, so but you can see where the rows and columns kind of work a little bit differently on a square surface, right? So I might change this to 5 and get something different, all right? And so I could still do that same thing where I can go in and manipulate, and so Control Z, click on this piece and then start moving it, okay? And I can kind of get a different effect depending on what I'm trying to do, okay? So that, it kind of, you can see the before and after. Here's what it was over on this side, and then as I made those modifications, you kind of move that gradient around a little bit and move that effect around, okay? So just a couple of things you can do. You know, the gradient mesh tool may be the exact thing you need to get out of a situation, or it may be something that you don't necessarily use. It really depends on your style and depends on what you're doing, and I'm sure there's a lot of things you can do with it that I'm not covering here, but just kind of as we're talking about gradients, this is something that might show up as you're doing different, you know, trying to understand different techniques, and so the more tools you have in your bag, the more you can do. So anyway, that was the gradient mesh tool, and where you find it under Object and also on the toolbar.